Who do you want to send to the trouble spots around the country where there's rioting or chaos at the border? Well, Townhall Media sends in a Marine. We're going to talk to him next on Come On Now. So what's going on the border, and who are the Riot Squad? Well, I've got a member of that squad here with me today. His name is Julio Rosas. He's a senior writer for Townhall Media, which of course is our mothership that we're always affectionately talking about here on PJ Media. Julio, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Man, it's good to hear from you. Before we get to the border, I know you've just been in my home state of Texas, actually. Well, I was going to say stone's throw. It'd be a pretty long stone's throw.
No, it's not. It's not a stone's throw.
200 miles, more or less. Maybe farther than that. But before we get to the border, I wanted to ask you about this Intercept story, calling you and some other guys, supposedly calling you guys out for, I think, reporting the news. Is that right?
Yes, but they said it in other ways. So yeah, no, basically they were accusing myself and some friends of mine who have gone and covered these riots in person all across the country that happened last year as basically being smear merchants of BLM and trying to purposefully edit videos out of context to make mountains out of molehills, essentially, when it came to the mostly peaceful riots that occurred last year. And it caught me off guard. Number one, the reason why it did is because they didn't reach out to me for comment, which, for this type of story, because it was a profile of sorts, right? So, and I was the first person that they named in the story. I'm in the lead. I'm the person in the featured image, which, by the way, they made me look very cool in that featured image. So thank you to the internet. So that's like the one good thing.
I'm really jealous of that photo. That's some nice stuff, man.
And so that's why I was surprised, because they didn't even bother to do basic journalism and reach out for comment and they didn't do that for most of us. I think they only reached out to Richard McGinnis, who's at the Daily Caller, and I think they might have also reached out to Elijah Schaefer, who's also one of the other people in the story. And so, yeah, no, it's completely false. It's basically, it's built on a false premise, which is that we're conservatives, so therefore we haven't accurately covered the BLM movement, which is just absolutely not true. And they if they had reached out for comment, I would have pointed to examples where I said, no, look, here is when I said things were peaceful.
Right.
And I did that in Kenosha. I did that in Chaz, and I even did it in Minneapolis. And so they were saying that we were a part of this right-wing ecosystem that feeds this false narrative that BLM, people and activists were violent last year, which is very true. They were.
Yes,
and I know that because I saw it, and I saw it multiple times throughout and that was the other kind of funny thing too, because Robert Mackey, who's the main journalist in the 24-minute video that they put out, he tried to boost his credentials by saying, oh, well, I have authority to speak on this because I live blogged the Arab Spring movement and the Occupy Wall Street movement. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's cute, I guess. I mean, I was there. I took a rubber bullet to the chest from Minnesota State Police. So I'm not sure. I'm sure those two don't really compare.
No.
But so it was just built on a faulty premise, and half the reason why is just because they clearly had an agenda, which was not real journalism. And the fact that they couldn't even be bothered to even if they didn't reach out for comment, they could have done a lot better research. They spent a lot of time on this. They absolutely did, but they didn't do a whole lot of research, which are two very different things. And the other thing is just that they barely mentioned that I also cover the Capitol riot, which undercuts the whole premise as well, because if I was this person who they said I was, I would have tried to, make the Trump supporters at the Capitol look good, or try to say, oh no, this was actually Antifa, not, these aren't real Trump supporters, something like that, which I didn't do, because again, I just did what I always did, which is just report what I see and stick to the facts. And, again, they try to sweep that bit under the rug too. And so that's how we came up with that, that big pile of garbage that they eventually did put out last Thursday.
Yeah, it's fascinating that they didn't reach out for comment, as you say, and also, and it used to be. It used to be sort of a badge of honor if you went to a story, a developing story, particularly a violent developing story, and reported on it, whatever you saw. These guys seem to have a problem with doing that. They would rather live blog from their basement, I guess, than go to where the action's actually happening.
Yeah, and look, that's fine because I mean, look, I understand why people don't want to do this type of work. I don't fault people for not wanting to do it because it is dangerous. I've been injured in these situations. I have to go in, bullet resistant vests and helmets and gas masks. I mean, this is dangerous, and I don't like to hype it up like that because then it's just like, oh, look at me. I'm not trying to be Jim Acosta over here, where it's like I'm such a freaking hero.
Yeah, please don't be Jim Acosta, whatever you do.
Right. And so that's why I don't, like brag about I just say like, look, I have a passion for doing it, which I do. And that's the other thing too. And this is what I would have told them if I would have told them, look, I don't care who's rioting. I have a passion for being in those situations to report accurately. And that's what I've always done. And I'm going to do it whether it's Antifa or BLM or leftists rioting, and I'm going to do that if Trump supporters are rioting, and the work speaks for itself in that regard. And so, to go back to my initial point, is just that so I don't blame people for not wanting to do it, but then if you're going to criticize people for doing it, at least do the work that proves your thesis, and they didn't, and you can kind of tell because they started out with me at the beginning, and they didn't even really criticize my work in the sense I was taking things out of context. It was just that, he covered Antifa rioting in Portland, which would have been a local story, but because he was there and he then went on Fox News, he made it into a national story. It's like, well, I mean, Antifa rioting for over 100 days it's a big story. It's a big story. It's not necessarily local. And also it's like, who are you to determine that would have just been a local story? You don't know that. And one of the reasons why you don't know that is because you weren't there. So again, it's just like, you gotta be there. And that's why I like going on the ground, whether it's at riots or whether it's at the border, because I want to see things for myself.
Yeah, well, and the absurdity that's only a local story. So that was happening in Portland, and it went for over 100 days. They also had Chaz in Seattle. They tried to set up a Chaz in Austin and several other cities. This was going on wherever the Democrats rule, essentially, these big cities, and where they were defunding police, and crime overall was spiking up. This wasn't, I mean, to call that a local story it's like calling the Gosnell story years ago, that Washington Post reporter who called that story just a local crime story. This was arguably the most prolific serial killer in American history. That's a big story.
Right. And so they clearly had an agenda and a narrative that they wanted to discredit us. And that to me is the more disturbing aspect of it it's the fact that if you report the facts that goes against the overall media ecosystem narrative that they want to push, they will go after you. They will try to discredit you. And so that's why it is up to me to make sure that whatever I put out there is as accurate as it can be, because I know as soon as I make a mistake, then they're going to pounce on that and then try to discredit everything else. And so that's why they couldn't really go after me in that way. They had to go to some other people with other examples, but because we're friends and because like we stick together, because it's a safety and numbers aspect when you're out there. Because I mean, in Minneapolis, I was out there by myself. That I didn't have a car. I didn't have bodyguards or none of that. I was literally just freewheeling and dealing out there, and whether or not that was a smart decision, I don't know. But so they started out with me, but then they moved on to some other people, and it's just like, well, then why are you throwing me into this? If it's just because I am more prolific than some of the other people when it comes to this, and then they came out with an official company statement, and then Robert Mackey did a thread later on, and they were saying that, we weren't putting a target on their back because they already put their faces out there. They go on Fox News. They do interviews. So we're not, to say that we're putting a target on the back is nonsense. And I said, well, that to make that claim is actually pretty stupid, because that is true. Obviously, I mean, people
Yeah.
can recognize me. But the difference is that the way that they were bringing attention to us, right? Because we've heard this for months from BLM and Antifa and other things that these are propagandists and right wing liars and all that. So don't trust them, whatever. But
Right.
now their irrational claims have been legitimized because an article from supposedly reputable news outlet was published. And so now I guarantee you, next time I cover a riot,
Yeah.
someone's going to link that into a comment saying like, oh, don't trust them because
Yes.
look what the Intercept reported. And, so that's going to follow me for as long as I continue doing this. And I think that's their goal. And that was their goal, right? Because they want to stick something in there so that they can then use to discredit further down the line with whatever happens. And so, I mean, the last riot I covered was Brooklyn Center right before the Chauvin verdict. So, there hasn't been anything like that since then, especially since the verdict came down with Chauvin being guilty on all three. So, there might be some more riots in the future. I don't know. I mean, I'll continue going wherever I go because I'm good at it. I have a passion for it, and people trust me because I have proven to be trustworthy.
Yeah, well, they definitely wrote that article to out you and put a target on your back when you're in these situations and to discredit you. That was the whole purpose. And the Intercept should be better than that. But as we know from hearing from Glenn Greenwald recently, the Intercept is not better than that. The Intercept is in fact woke and has really gone to the dark side.
Well, and the other aspect of it too, just really quick, and
Yeah.
I never made this because it's not a real argument, but I could have, if I wanted to play by the rules, I could have easily been because it was me and Jorge Ventura at the Daily Caller, who was also Hispanic.
Right.
It's these two white guys going after us. I was told that that's racist and that's endangering minority lives. So, how dare they? But obviously I'm not going to make that argument because that's just a stupid argument to make.
Yeah.
But they clearly, the rules don't apply to us because we're conservative.
Yeah, well, I will say this: wokeness is the domain of white privilege. We're seeing this over and over and over again, that the people who lead the woke movement are privileged, wealthy white people, and they're doing it in a way to divide the rest of us. So I think that is an argument that can be made. I wouldn't say they're racist for targeting you guys. They're targeting you because you're conservative and because you're good. That's why they're targeting you. So moving on from the riot stories and the riot squad and all that, which is fascinating. I recommend people follow your coverage and everything you're doing because you're good at it. You just came back from the border here in my home state of Texas. Where were you?
So I was in the Rio Grande Valley. I was being based out of McAllen, but I went as far as Roma, out west, and kind of in between that kind of area of, it was US 83. Is that the road? 83. And I mean, and look, from what I can tell, and actually I just tweeted this out, but we hear from the Biden administration, oh, the border's closed, it's not open. I mean, Tuesday night? I saw Monday night. I saw 150 people just waltz right in. In just this one path, right? And so it is true that they are deporting people that they do catch, but they're only doing it under Title 42, which is the CDC guidance that was put in place at the start of the pandemic because they didn't rightfully, they didn't want to have people congregating close together in the overcrowded border patrol stations, right? So that's the only really thing that's been kept by the Biden administration in terms of policy from the Trump administration. But they've now made exceptions where if you're pregnant, if you are an unaccompanied minor, you turn yourself in, you're going to be able to stay. Family units are a bit of a mix. Sometimes they'll deport you. Sometimes, other times they'll let you loose. And so this is continuing, right? The crisis is continuing. And I interviewed a rancher whose family's been there for many, many years. He said this is the worst it's ever been. He said it went beyond a crisis. It's chaotic. That's what he was saying. And that's why, again, you have to go down there for yourself to see it, because it's one thing to know that it's happening, but when you see it for yourself and you realize that this is on a near daily basis, and obviously not just in that Rio Grande Valley, but in Del Rio, in some other areas, the Tucson sector. So Laredo's bad. Laredo is also right up there. So it's happening all along the border, and we have an administration that just is not they fixed the outflow, thankfully. Like that's like the only good thing they've done so far is that the border patrol stations are no longer super overcrowded. But that's because they've expedited the releasing, they've expedited, transferring them to different facilities that they had to open up to open capacity. So even then, that's just not even really solving it. They've got a better way of just getting them out of the border patrol stations. But the inflow of people is still very high. And the month of April, they apprehended over 178,000 people, which is astronomically high. Even the month of May is now typically the peak season because they're trying to get in before it gets too hot. But to me, the most disturbing number is the one that we don't really know because it's the gotaways. It's the people who are known to enter the United States but are not able to be intercepted or apprehended. And estimates range, and this is the low end, I'm told, is 1,000 people to 1,500 a day. Where and that's the ones that we know that are entering and not, so there's all this other, so it could be well over 2,000, 3,000 people, right?
Yeah.
And those are the ones that are not the family units. Those are the ones that are not the unaccompanied minors. So you have to wonder, okay, so then who are these people and why are they trying to avoid apprehension?
Yeah. So real quick, the interview you did with the rancher, we're going to go ahead and roll that right now. So go ahead, guys, in the mothership, roll tape on that.
We're under a Biden presidency.
Yeah.
Did you notice a difference right away in terms of people crossing into your property?
Immediately there was a difference. Everybody knows, what media has not covered. A lot of media has covered what's happening, And yes, immediately there was a big change. It was this open door policy that I believe that's what I call it, open door policy, as opposed to what we had before, made a huge difference on the impact on the border and also on landowners as ourselves. The landowners, of course, one of the problems that we face all the time is these migrants or whatever, when they come across, unfortunately, a lot of them are really good people. There's some bad people, yes, obviously, like in anything else. But the way they impact the landowners is pretty significant. I, as one of the landowners, there's so many landowners, that what happens to us is the intrusion or trespassing, if you will, on our property causes damages. Damages in the nature of fences being torn down, gates being left open, cattle get commingled, and a lot of times, because they're coming from Mexico, they bring what is called a fever tick. And a fever tick is detrimental to cattle, It's a problem.
So I thought that was a great interview. I thought the rancher pointed out that this is the worst he's ever seen, and he's been down there a long time. I actually interviewed a rancher farther inland a few weeks ago who is in LaSalle County, and she's 56 miles from the border, and she says it's the worst she's ever seen. And one of the things she commented on, I wanted to get your comment on, is this issue of bailouts. Did you hear about this, where the stolen vehicles and all that? Did you see any of this?
Yep. Yeah, so I did a ride. So my first day when I went down there was I did a ride along with the Brooks County Sheriff's Department or office, and we were going up and down 281. Is that the highway?
Right.
Is it? Yeah, 281. And because there is a checkpoint, there is a border patrol checkpoint a little bit in towards Brooks County, and so the bailouts, people that are. So what happens is, so the people that are able to avoid detection at the border. So Brooks County is about an hour north of McAllen, and they get picked up. They get dropped off before the checkpoint because obviously they're not just going to roll up with a bunch of people in the back. But then they then go either west or east onto private ranches, and then they try to make their way up north. And the typical way that they do it is they give one guy a phone that has a marker or pinpoint on it on the map, and they just say go here and then call them once you're at that point. And then sometimes they make it, a lot of times they do make it, but other times they don't, for whatever reason. And so the sheriff's deputy that I was with, he took me to like the back roads to where they get picked up after they leave the highway. And it is remote. Brooks County is not, I think it's like only 8,000 people that live there. So it is mostly just ranchers and wide open spaces. And so You saw a lot of the damage to the fencing because, I mean, just day after day, people, and even some of the ranchers, to avoid having to constantly fix it, and the money that gets sucked into that, they build ladders for them on their property, so they use the ladders instead of cutting through. And so, I mean, that's what they've had to do because they know what happens, and so that's just a reality they have to live with. And so, to save money and just to make sure that they don't lose their animals or whatever that they're in charge of, that's what they have to do, because and so that's a really unfortunate reality that they have to live in. And so while I was there, we were on the ride along for like 10 minutes, and we got a call that, hey, it was a Border Patrol agent, and I got 6 in the back, and the driver's trying to get away, and I'm still in the car. And so we raced down, and some state troopers also responded. And so it was very interesting to see the different tactics and the different demographics at that point, because like I said, those aren't the family units. There was one unaccompanied minor. He was 17. And so the others were like 32, 18, 20. And so there was just a whole different calls while just in that. I think I was there for like 3-4 hours with him. And it was just constant. And and it's like that most every day. Some days they don't get anything, but like I said, the fact that this is happening on a near daily basis is very concerning. And the fact that it's happening at such a high rate now under this current administration.
Yeah. So last question for you, because I know you've got to go. What's one thing that you saw on the border that surprised you most, or that you think the rest of the country needs to hear about, but they're not hearing enough about?
I think it would be the gotaways. It just and the reason why a lot of people don't know about it is just because even law enforcement doesn't exactly know how many are able to just avoid apprehension. And that, like I said, that to me is the most disturbing aspect, because a lot of times when people, the more liberal side are talking about this, they, oh, well, look, it's because, I took pictures of little kids and moms and babies and all that. And so they're like, how can this be a crisis? Because obviously these are people just trying to escape terrible situations. And look, I fully admit that they are, but with that is the more hardened criminal element that is more in the shadows, because they know that if they send the family units, if they send the kids that are by themselves out first, it's going to bog down Border Patrol. And so it's going to be easier to send in their narcotics or the gang members or people who, like I said, really want to be caught. The other aspect of it is, what I always like to say is that the first victims of illegal immigration are the immigrants themselves, because I mean the terrible things that they go through on this journey north. I mean, it is very, very dangerous for multiple reasons, for the environment, to the people, because obviously these are not the human smugglers and cartels aren't doing this out of the kindness of their heart. They are abusing them. They are taking advantage of them. And then even then, if they make it into the United States and get to their final destination, because this is so expensive and because obviously they don't have a whole lot of money, what happens a lot of times is that they get into like this indentured servitude,
right,
where they have to continue paying off their debt. And obviously if they don't, then bad things happen still. So that's something I think is not talked about enough, is that even when they make it to the United States, the moms or the kids, someone is still having to pay something. And it's not a good situation to be in. And so obviously then the negative effects of illegal immigration ripple out from that to where it affects American citizens and what have you. But the first people who suffer from this influx are the immigrants themselves.
Yeah. Man, thanks for your time today, Julio. I really appreciate it. And I just really appreciate what you've been doing, reporting where the news is happening, whether it's on the border, whether it's Portland, Wisconsin, wherever it is that things are happening, you're there. And thanks for what you do.
Appreciate it.
We've been listening to Julio Rosas from Townhall Media, our senior writer here, our Riot Squad guy here, and now our border reporter here at Townhall Media. For PJ Media, I'm Bryan Preston.